Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. Today we are kind of going over some upgrades I just made to my South Bend 9A lathe. One was unnecessary, more of a repair slash upgrade, which was the belt. The other was changing the chuck that I had been using kind of up to this point, and wanting to just try something different. So this is the 3-jaw chuck that came with the lathe when I bought it. When I made the purchase, it came with quite a bit of stuff. This as well as a nice 4-jaw chuck. But primarily for anything that I've done, this has worked really well for anything that I've thrown at it, right? And if you're kind of new to lathes or trying to figure that out, which way you want to go, that's just what holds your work, right? So it slides in, we use our key, we hold it down, crank it, and we've got a nice solid holding piece. I wanted to also include with what I had to go with what's called a collet chuck. Was it a necessity? No. How much use will I get out of it? I don't know, but I did want to go with that for a couple of reasons. One, I just wanted to learn the system. I wanted to learn what its pros and cons were, learn a little bit more about that. It wasn't a huge amount of money to get into the new chuck, and I already had the collet. So if we're looking at what a collet is, this is a 5C collet, a pretty common size collet, and I already had these collets for what are called collet blocks. So this is a collet block I would use for certain things on the mill. Primarily slides in, and then there's a drawbar that would pull this in and tighten up on the workpiece. So by going with the 5C, I was able to get what I needed out as far as the holding collet, but also not having to buy a whole other set. I already have a set of R8s for my mill. I had the 5Cs, and I didn't want to go into like a 3C collet or a 6 collet. I was hoping to minimize my spend on that, and so I finally came across one that more or less was a bolt-on for the South Bend that was a 5C collet. How is this used? We'll look at it in the chuck, but if you have, this is a 3/4 collet, 3/4 rod, you're just going to slide the workpiece in, and then you're going to crank down on the chuck, and it's going to pull the collet into the chuck, and then compress. Where you see these splits here, those are going to compress and tighten down and hold that workpiece. So I do think there's a lot of benefits in that when you are working with a kind of a standardized piece. This is again exactly 3/4 inch. This is 3/4 inch. There's going to be a little bit of plus minus that you can get away with, where the 3-jaw is going to hold essentially anything, and you're going to adjust accordingly. When I bought my lathe, it came with this nice collet chuck, but I have nothing more than these 2 collets it came with, and I've had absolutely no information as to the maker of this chuck or what size collet these are. I've tried to research that. I've had some leads like, oh, it's maybe this, and then when I do measurements, it doesn't pan out. So I finally said, okay, let me take a look at this one. So we'll jump over and take a look at that. The other piece that I did was during the process of setting up the backing plate for the new chuck, I ended up finally my original belt, the leather flat belt, just finally gave way. Luckily, it was at a spot where I was close to a wrap up on one of the first steps that I needed to do, and so I ended up doing the upgrade to quote-unquote upgrade, I guess, to a automotive serpentine belt, which I think that there's pluses and minuses that exist into there. So I did that. We'll take a look at that, and then while we're in there, we're looking just another quick review. I've had in another video, but to just look at the DRO, right, the digital readout system that I have on there, since we're playing around and kind of doing all things South Bend. Now, before we jump over and do take a look at that, this was not a smooth, easy process. I kind of had some hiccups along the way. If we use this chuck as an example, and you can see there's a split here, right? That would be the backing plate, right? So the chuck that I ordered comes with the chuck and it comes with the backing plate. And a couple of things on that when I got it, this end piece that threads onto the spindle really had an excessive amount of material that was bottoming out before I was really far into the threads. I didn't like that, so I ended up taking a 1/4 inch off of my chuck to get that down to where it was then engaging far more of the threads, and I just felt more comfortable with that. But throughout the process, and I didn't record me machining the backing plate there, only because there's a lot of videos out there that already exist, and from people far more skilled than me, but I had some screw ups along the way as well there. So if we look at how it is, the backing plate on that one has this piece. This butts up against the spindle, right? So right up against there, threads on, your chuck mounts to it. On the inside face of the backing plate on that one is another kind of extrusion here. Call it 3 1/4 inches. It's not exactly 3 1/4, but around that, so you can get an idea. And just call it 1/8 of an inch, raised up. And so you have to machine that down to match up with your chuck and have everything fit, square it all up to your lathe and get that machine down to your lathe. So as I was doing that, a few things were occurring. One, at one point I was getting just absolutely horrible surface finish, and so I really think that was just mostly the angle of which I was coming in. I had to, because I was working on with the backing plate just sits very, very close to the the left edge of my bed, and so I'm trying to get these funky angles with my compound slide to be able to get in far enough. And I also have an issue with the way my DRO scale holds, that I'm missing 1.5 inches there. So I had to work around that, and I think it was getting me just some really weird cuts. I finally get that situated, and I was happy with the finish. I think it was turning out good. But then the two other issues that I ended up having was, again, on the inside, not this part, on the inside one that almost mimics this, just a different dimension. I had two things occur. One was that I had my measurements, and I was approaching my measurements very slowly, and I was in great shape. Like, everything was looking good. And my original intent was to bring it up to the exact measurement because there's a lip inside that chuck. So it's basically the back up a little bit. That piece is used to register your chuck and center it on the backing plate. So you want a pretty close tolerance. If you are interested, Cloud42 has a great video where they actually, he sets up the same chuck, but goes through the process of machining that, and gets a really nice, like within 1/1000ths clearance. And so I was targeting that as well. I was aiming for that, and I was on my way to doing that. And again, the whole point is so that you can register the chuck and have this nice fit, and then get things, you're basically aiming for reducing your run out. And then rookie move, right? Screwing it up, just hitting the DRO incorrectly instead of going in 1/1000th. I mean, we're talking nothing here. I set the DRO to 10/1000ths. So a massive difference. So looking at that, I go in 9/1000ths deeper than I should. When you're looking what 9/1000ths is, it's very, very small still, but when you're looking at registering the center of your chuck, that becomes a massive measurement. But I did have another cushion of about 1/1000. So the going in for 1/1000ths was so that the inner diameter of the chuck and the outer diameter of my backing plate were identical. I wanted to take it in 1/1000th from there. So I was really now 8 thousandths over, which was still a tremendous amount. And then upon bolting everything together and running it on the lathe, I had massive run out, even just on the end of the chuck itself. So that was a bit of a screw up. The other thing that I was also facing was that when I machined down on the inner side, I had a little bit of a shoulder left, an inside shoulder that wasn't allowing the chuck to sit down flush. And so what was happening was I've got 8 thousandths of essential movement where this thing can get, just mounted incorrectly. Plus I wasn't able to get it really flush down because of the kind of that shoulder I left in. So all kinds of screw ups, and quite frankly I figured, okay, well, I've just completely blown out that backing plate. I'm gonna have to foot the bill for another one, which I wasn't stoked on doing, but I just call it my tuition for learning. Then I just slowed it down and tried to see what could be recoverable. So I aimed at getting the shoulder eliminated, which I did, allowed the chuck to get flush. I actually used my surface plate just to make sure that the back side of that chuck was flush. So there was no high spots, no low spots, and it was machined correctly from the go. Like I didn't take any material off. It was in a good place there. So now I've got it sitting flush. I've got that shoulder machined down correctly. I've got my surface finish, which to me is also an important piece. It's got to look good. I've got that going. But the problem I had was that movement that it had in that 8 thousandths it didn't mean it wasn't recoverable. It just meant more time setting it up and getting it into where it needed to be, getting it into the right kind of, just getting it centered, right? And so I landed on that. I was able to hit it. I think my run out is less than a half thou, which is about the best I was able to get that. I could not find, and that could even just be in my spindle alone and not the chuck. I mean, after all, there's been some cleanup and some little bit of work done on that lathe over its lifetime, but it's still from 1965, so it's going to have, just based on its use, without a full rebuild and restoration done it, there's going to be a little bit of wear in there. So that half thou that I'm seeing, or slightly less than, it could very well be in the machine itself and not necessarily the chuck. So I guess on the plus side of it is I went from a good backing plate that came out of the box, needed some kind of tuning to get it right for my machine, to completely screwing that thing up to a point where it was barely going to be a paperweight, to then being able to come out on the back side of it and get it where it needed to be, and being pretty happy with the results that I ended up with. As I'm still new at playing around with not only any machining work, but just coming in and running up close to my tolerances and ensuring that I'm spending that time and not becoming impatient to just get things done. And I was on my way there, and just a complete lapse of paying attention, I ended up taking the 10 thou versus the 1 thou, and that's just luckily recoverable. So we'll jump over right now. We're going to take a look at the lathe and kind of see how it all came together, and talk a bit on those upgrades. Okay, we are over at the lathe to just take a look at a couple of things get going here. I really like this. I really do like this machine. I had been after, my original intent was a new Precision Matthews, which if they're listening, I'll still take a Precision Matthews. But I was after a Precision Matthews machine, was my original intent when I was building out the shop space. And just the way things were coming together, I decided to go mostly vintage machining in here, and came across this, and I really like the way it feels. It's nice and tight, and smooth all at the same time, right? And so it really feels good to use, feels solid. You're missing some of the, the technology that exists. You're missing variable speed, even the ease of getting things on there. But ultimately, this works I think just really, really well for what I'm after. Bring in a little closer to look at kind of where we are with things. So this is the chuck. Getting a bit of a glare there. This is the Collet chuck that ended up being added on. And I think it turned out really well. This was one where my finish was really goofy and I got it down to really matching how it came. So I thought that turned out well. And looking at kind of how that goes and how that's used, let me grab our rod there. So if we look, there's basically like an indexing pin there, and you'll see here that's intended for this piece. So this will slide in. Well, it's gonna slide in. There it goes. All right, so that's seated to get itself started. I could put the workpiece in now, or I can get this kind of started in and make sure that it's pulling and holding. All right, you're getting a close-up because I need another hand. All right, so now that's in, and that's grabbing into the threads here. My workpiece would then slide in, and you can see how that's going to hold there. And then you would just tighten this down. I don't feel you need to go crazy. Thank you. I don't feel you need to crank this down, more than snug. You don't want it turning. You don't want this moving while you're machining it. So you want to get it to where it's solid and secure. But there's some videos out there of people just cranking and really muscling that down. And I just don't think I don't know if that's necessary. I don't know if the insides of that are going to handle. And so now you can see how that ends up holding in there. And so that's I guess kind of the speed and ease that would exist with going with the Collet chuck. Necessary? No. Do I like it? Yes, I'm very happy with how it turned out. Very happy with the run out. Happy with how I got the machining done. This was the spot where I was telling you I took a 1/4 inch off of it. This was much deeper and I just wasn't getting much threads in there. Finish came out good. My run out turned out good. While the registration indexing piece is still not right, I'm still able to center it. And once this is all tightened down to the backing plate, I'm not taking it off unless I have to service this. And so I'll spend a little bit of time to reset it back to center, and it's good to go. So a couple other things that we look at on this lathe. Again, this is the 9A, and where the 9A comes in is it has the quick change gearbox for threading purposes. So I think that's a cool piece. I love these cheap sewing machine lights, magnetic base, so they can kind of go anywhere you need to throw them, up and out of the way. So this is where I've added in the serpentine belts, which I think works pretty well on this. The way this is set up, you actually have to cut, and there's a lot of videos on this as well, so I'm not going to run through that. You cut the belt, get it down to your correct size, and then you need to splice it back together. So use the 3M, I think it's P40 rubber glue, and it's held well together. There was a spot, this is off the track here, because I release the tension on it when I'm not using it, where the middle felt like it was coming undone a bit right out of the gate when I pulled the clamps off from holding it. So I threw some large staples in it just in the center, and that seemed to be holding that really good. So that's a good upgrade. I actually still am going to order a backup flat leather belt for, I don't know, backup spare, I guess, on that. Other upgrades on this, I have the quick change tool post, so the Aloris AXA. If you do not have a quick change your tool post on whatever lathe you are using, I would strongly encourage it. And as you can see, I had to really work with some funky designs, and this was not only funky angles. This was the angle and the tool I had to use to finally get in to the backing plate and get that shoulder down to where I needed it to be, and that worked really good, and it just cleaned it right up and got me where I needed to be. And then, you know, the last upgrade, which is not immediate, this wasn't done recently, this was done previously, is the DRO system for this. Now, I did previous videos, I had it here, but I needed to move it because I was losing considerable amount. I was losing this amount of space for my cross slide to work as it was bumping up against that. And then there's another piece almost equal in size that holds the scale. If we look back here, so that's holding the scale on for the DRO. So this originally was set out to about here. Then we added in the mount for the screen, so I was losing you know, three inches or so. So I moved the DRO screen and then moved my scale as far down as I could get it, and that picked me up really the necessary space to be able to machine that backing plate. So again, I a lot of learning. Sorry, get that. This was, you know, I've made a lot of really small things throughout with this lathe, and especially as I was learning how to turn things and get tapers or certain finishes or ball ends, any of that. Like, I spent a lot of time playing on this, understanding the machine, knowing what its capabilities were, how I needed to operate it. And then since I've done that, I progressively tried to go further. We'll have a video coming out where I'm building a fixture plate for my rotating table for the mill. But I wanted to get this piece in first. So this was probably one of my bigger projects, and for some that have done a lot of machining, this is nothing. This is a quick, easy, I've just got to, you know, machine my backing plate and get this thing mounted, and did so in a very rapid amount of time. But for me, it wasn't rapid. It took a little bit of time. I didn't want to rush it. I wanted to make sure that it came out correct. I didn't want some hack job. I didn't want to feel like I did a hack job, even if I made it work. I can walk away now saying, okay, so I goofed up a couple of things along the way, but I don't feel like it was a hack job. I just know what to do better next time, what better to pay attention on, and I think that is where I'm more comfortable coming out of it and knowing, hey, I didn't hack this up. I did a good job with it, while at the same time just expanding my skills and learning. Why I got target fixated on having a collet chuck, I have no idea, but I did, and it's been weighing on me for about a year and a half. And I think when I referenced earlier Cloud 42's James's video where he was putting one on a Grizzly, a couple years old now, and so I started to look into that. And this is the Bowstar, got it on eBay, imported out of China for certain, but I think the quality is pretty good. I think there's been some hit and miss stories on this. So far, this one, it feels good, it looks good, it holds good, it doesn't feel all chunky, and it's a nice smooth feel when you're trying to engage it and disengage it. It pulls in smoothly, it disengages and extracts the collet smoothly. So I'm pretty happy overall with that. So again, that's the South Bend 9A lathe. One last thing I would hit on: if you are shopping for a lathe, you are shopping in the used market, right? I think there's always do I go with the used old vintage American, or do I buy a new Asian import, pluses and minuses to both. Every argument is wrong and every argument is right. It all depends on what use case you have. For me, I felt like I was getting my biggest bang for my buck by going with the South Bend. It also fit the vibe of my shop, right? A lot of the old vintage American tooling, so I think that fits into there as well. But shop around these. So they have the 9, most common in this, you've got the 9 and you've got the 10s, right? That's the 9-inch swing and the 10-inch swing. They're very similar. I think it's the 10L has some variances. Or 10L is about the same as a 9A. There's some variances that exist, but they're really close and really similar. And the 10 heavy is quite a bit different. And then in the 9s, you have the 9A, B, and C, with the C being kind of the most base model. You have essentially like power nothing, right? Where here you've got on the A, you've got the quick change gearbox, and you've got the power cross slide and just a little bit more upgrades. And so I was really happy to have found this one. Pricing, right? If you start to look at where you're at with pricing, I'm out in California, everything's more expensive out here, but I think when you get to certain tools, there's not huge variances in what you might see on pricing between here and say the Midwest. I do think on certain tools like South Bend or even the Shopsmith, there tends to be a lot more of these in states outside of California, but they can still be had, and you could still get these for a good price. Where are you going to be at for pricing? I've seen the 9As selling, not just advertised, selling all over the place, right? Between say $800 upwards of even $2,500, and them selling. This one again is the 9A with the cabinet, so it's got the undermount motor, comes with the cabinet table, which I absolutely love. But you could also get these where they did not have the cabinet. You have a motor that's basically off in the back here, takes up a little bit more space front to back, so you have to keep that in mind. Cost is usually a little bit lower than what you would find on that. The other thing that I would say is always look at how much tooling comes along with this. When I bought this actual machine, it didn't come with a ton. Came with, I think I mentioned earlier that it came with the 3-jaw and the 4-jaw chuck, but that was actually incorrect. The 4-jaw came off of a different deal, which I'll just quickly hit on. But when I bought this, it came with, obviously the machine came with my 3-jaw chuck. It came with the Aloris quick change, just a couple of odds and ends. It came with the, obviously the tail stock. I think it came with the chuck, came with my steady rest, and a kind of a unique piece. It came with a fixture that goes back here, which is a tool holding piece. Drawing a blank on what it's called. Still drawing a blank, but it would be a work holding piece. This goes into your tail stock, and then you can just flip through holding different tools in there, and you just pull this down and you can rotate to the next tool. So that is not a super common piece. So it had some cool pieces that I thought came along with it. But I got the bulk of my tooling that matched on this was when I bought this lathe. I actually bought two South Bends in one day. I found a really, really nice 9C. Gentleman's father had passed. He was clearing out kind of his garage-based machine shop, and it was just well kept. The son who was actually selling it had also grown up using it. So he knew the history of it. It was just incredibly well cared for and came with an immense amount of tooling. So I had made a deal on pricing, and then I was going to pick it up, and then this thing popped up for sale. And I was like, oh, it's the 9A model, and it's cabinet mount. But I didn't want to back out of my deal that I'd already set with the other guy. So I bought them both that day. And it worked out really well for me, because what it allowed me to do was essentially take all the extra tooling, and that 9C came with just endless amounts. There was so much stuff that thing came with, that I ended up being able to scavenge all the tooling from that, and then resell the 9C for what I ended up paying him for it. So it was as though I got all the tooling for free, and the extra 4-jaw chuck, some backing plates, and just a tremendous amount of extras that came through. And so if you do spend the time shopping around, it's always a give or take. You've got, it's time or money, right? I always think that one of them you have to concede to. So if you want to save the money, you're going to put the time into saving. You're going to put the time into looking and searching, right? You're going to have to spend the time and find the right deal. Or if you want to save time, sometimes you're going to end up having to pay for it. And so that becomes the reality of it. In this case, it was definitely the time, but I was in no rush. And I really enjoyed the digging in and researching and learning about the South Bends, and knowing that 100% was the route I wanted to go. Like, I finally settled down, I'm going South Bend. I looked at the Craftsman, I looked at the Atlas, which were essentially the same. I was looking at Logan's, and I was just like, this is it. This was the absolute deal. So they could be had, right? You can jump into this for, $500. You could even get yourself a really nice 9C out in this area. 9A, you're going to probably be closer to $1,000. And as I said, I've seen them upwards of $1,500, depending upon condition and the tools that they come with. So if you are looking at lathe, that's something to consider. You could also look at jumping into an import lathe, which I think are also they're pretty reasonable, especially in the hobby space. I think that some are better than others. I think many of them are all going to need some work. Let me pop a few back down. I recently acquired this 7x12, which my intent was not to buy this, and my intent was not to keep this, but I was in it a really good price, and it fit right here. I did nothing more than turn this from this direction to this direction. I gave up some surface space, which was just going to be junk collecting anyway, and I was able to fit that in. Why? I have no idea. Didn't need it. I've got this lathe. I've got my Shoreline up there, so I've got big, medium, and small. But I do see a lot in the long run where this is going to be incredibly useful, because it is, to me, mid-sized to what I would do. Most would consider this the mid-size one for machining and production, but for what I would be doing, this would be the mid-size. And this is going to be something I see myself teaching my son how to work on this sized one, and have him start to learn some of the stuff. As I learn it, I can carry it over to him on that. So, all right, as usual, my super long-winded quick video. I'm going to close things out. All right, I'll see you all next time. Thank you.